Hi, Dr. Adams. You wanted to see me?
Hi, Sarah. Yes, I just wanted to talk to you about your zoology report. I'm making appointments with everyone to talk about their papers.
Oh, okay.
So, what are you writing your report on now?
I'm looking at bird migrations.
Oh, great. That's such a great topic. Are you focusing on anything specific?
I think I've narrowed it down to birds that do short distance migrations. You know, geese and those birds?
Was there a reason you chose that particular topic?
Actually, a big part of the decision just came from the fact that I found the most information on short distance migration. Oh, and I found a lot of information on geese.
Okay, well, that's a pretty good reason to go with that. So, what direction are you taking this report in?
Well, I thought I'd talk about goose migration in general. I found out that all geese have the same general migration pattern, so I'm going to discuss that first. Then I'm going to talk about the patterns of specific geese, like I thought I'd compare a few different species like the Canadian goose versus the Hawaiian goose.
That sounds good. I'm looking forward to reading your paper.
All right, class. So we've been talking about famous inventors this week. One of the most famous inventors of the Renaissance was Leonardo da Vinci. Who knows what else da Vinci was famous for?
Paintings. He did the Mona Lisa.
That's absolutely right. Da Vinci was the artist who painted the famous Mona Lisa. He also painted The Last Supper and was famous for architecture and sculptures, and so many different art forms. In addition to all this, he was also a famous inventor. He drew sketches of airplanes 400 years before the first plane took flight. The thing was, though, that most of these inventions were all way before his time, so they didn't help people much during his time, yes?
What do you mean by way before his time?
Well, he thought these things up, but the technology back then wasn't good enough, actually, to create any of these inventions. Anyway, some of his inventions were created. For example, Da Vinci created the anemoscope. An anemoscope is a device that tells you which direction the wind is blowing. It also is supposed to tell you what direction the wind is going to change before it even does.
So does the anemoscope still exist?
No one really uses it anymore, but they did a long time ago.
Before we start our tour of the club, I'll just run through some basic information about the facilities we have here, including recent improvements, and explain the types of membership available. Our greatest asset is probably our swimming pool, which at 25 metres isn't Olympic sized, but now we've expanded it to 8 lanes, it's much wider. This means there are rarely more than a couple of people at a time in each lane. Unfortunately, there isn't space for an outdoor pool here, but the glass roof on the swimming pool is partly retractable, which means you can enjoy something of the open-air experience on warmer days. Our recently refurbished fitness suite has all the latest exercise equipment, including 10 new running machines and a wide range of weight training machines. Each member is given full training in how to operate the equipment, and there is always a trainer on duty to offer help and advice. Although we do have adult-only times after 6 and at certain times at weekends, children are well catered for. Older children continue to benefit from a wide range of tuition, anything from trampolining to yoga.
We are led to believe that basically much of eastern North America was heavily cloaked in mature forest that today we covet as old growth, and yet at one time it was the sort of ancestral botanical blanket that covered much of certainly Massachusetts and New England. Certainly one of the first things that happened as increasing waves of colonists arrived was the need to clear the land. And this clearing of the land is something that started really in the form of small subsistence farms. The timber was used for building houses, for building ships, for firewood, for all manner of things. The boulders, the glacial erratic stones that were so much a part of the New England landscape are today sort of what we find in the lattice work of stone walls that one can find practically anywhere on the landscape if it's in a relatively untouched condition. By the early part of the 19th century, it's thought that generally the zenith of clearing had taken place sometime in the 1830s, 1840s, and the trees and the forests were essentially clear-cut to an extent that is almost unbelievable.
The division of literary works into genres, or texts that deal with a particular subject or a subject in a particular way, makes life easier for the person browsing in a bookshop. He or she can go directly to where their favourite kind of book is shelved, be it science fiction, gothic, romance, and so on. Many writers of genre fiction are immensely popular and successful. Stephen King and J.K. Rowling, to name only two. But, for the most part, such writers aren't depicting the world we live in and are writing fantasies. However, some genre writers, particularly writers of detective and police fiction, are unhappy about being categorized in this way. Genre fiction, they say, has come to be seen as inferior to what is called mainstream or literary fiction. In other words, detective fiction isn't taken seriously as literature, and yet crime novels do deal with the raw stuff of everyday life. They are, in fact, closer to the harsh reality of the modern world than most mainstream fiction. But, the critics say, while they do deal with the usual stuff of novels, character, emotion, psychology, social comment and so on, it seldom goes very deep, and, besides, most detective fiction, like certain mass-produced romantic novels, though not to anywhere near the same extent, follow a formula. The basic English person's diet in medieval times was made up of bread, cheese and beef, while ale was the drink for all ages and social classes except for the aristocracy who drank wine. In winter there were no root crops to feed the animals, so they were killed in autumn and the meat salted to preserve it. People kept livestock even in the towns. Cows were usually kept tied or tethered, but pigs were allowed to wander at will, feeding on the rubbish off the streets. By the 16th century, however, choice in foodstuffs had grown, including exotic spices to add flavour to the usual diet. This had come about because European rulers, wanting to increase their power and wealth, and also, in fairness, in the spirit of inquiry and the quest for knowledge, had financed voyages of exploration overseas. This opened up trade routes, bringing precious spices and vast profits from the east, and to the west, Spanish and Portuguese explorers had brought back such novelties as potatoes, tomatoes, maize, peppers, and chocolate. It must be said, though, that it took people some time to accept some of these new foods, as they feared they were poisonous. Scientists distinguish two basic ways in which we receive information from the outside world through the sense of touch: active and passive, or, to put it more simply, touching and being touched. Being touched, or passive tactile awareness, includes sensing external pressure and temperature acting on parts of the body, and this gives us clues as to the nature of our environment. Active touching is when we explore our surroundings with our hands, feet, mouth, and so on. Because it's difficult to guess what some objects are really like with the eyes alone, for example, their weight, hardness or softness, roughness or smoothness, etc., touching them gives us a much fuller understanding of the objects around us. Yet, how touch works is very complex and
When, in 1960, still a student, I got a traveling fellowship to study housing in North America. We traveled the country. We saw public housing, high-rise buildings in all major cities, New York, Philadelphia. Those who had no choice lived there. And then we traveled from suburb to suburb. And I came back thinking, we got to reinvent the apartment building. There has to be another way of doing this. We can't sustain suburbs. So let's design a building which gives the qualities of a house.
People, animals, plants, and fungi all get diseases. Pathogens cause them. Pathogens are things such as bacteria and viruses. They enter living things and cause them to get sick and sometimes to die. But living things have defenses against pathogens. These defenses are found in their immune systems. There are two types of immune systems, innate and adaptive. First, let's examine the innate immune system. An innate immune system in a living thing is always active. It's an organism's first line of defense against diseases. Let's think about humans, shall we? The skin is our first defense. How? Well, it prevents many things from entering the body. Also, the mucus in the nose prevents airborne foreign bodies, many of which are harmful, from entering the body. What else? There are defenses in the body as well. For instance, both the stomach and intestines produce acids. Some of them are able to remove pathogens from the food we eat. There's another important defense inside the body. These are white blood cells. When pathogens enter the body, white blood cells move to fight them. It's like they're soldiers fighting an invading army. The white blood cells go where the pathogens are. They attack the pathogens and try to remove them from the body. As you can guess, they're extremely useful. Now, how about some innate systems in other animals and plants? Let me give you some specific examples of them.
Type 1.
Okay, so we've discussed the mosquito's appearance and life cycle. Now let's cover what mosquitoes are most famous for, sucking blood. Mosquitoes suck blood from various animals. You see, a mosquito has a long feeder appendage in its mouth. The appendage penetrates an animal's skin. Then the mosquito sucks the animal's blood. Interestingly, only females suck blood. The blood they get enables them to reproduce.
How so?
Proteins in the blood they suck help them produce the eggs they lay. So they don't use the blood as food. For food, both female and male mosquitoes usually eat nectar from plants. Tragically, mosquitoes kill more people than any other creature on Earth. Their bites don't kill, though, but the diseases that mosquitoes carry do. Millions of people die every year from malaria, dengue fever, yellow fever, and other diseases that mosquitoes carry. When mosquitoes bite people, they transmit whatever diseases they happen to be carrying. Each year, more than 2 million people die from mosquito-carried diseases. That's a big number, huh? Unfortunately, controlling mosquitoes is difficult since they breed and spread rapidly. They lay their eggs in stagnant water like in swamps. So draining these areas can control them. Insecticides, insect killers, can also eliminate them. DDT is one such insecticide. It's highly effective, but it's banned in many countries. Some people claim that DDT harms certain animals. Still, in countries that use DDT, there are fewer deaths by diseases transmitted by mosquitoes.
Migrant children who do attend schools in cities usually get a worse education than their city-born counterparts. State schools that accept migrant pupils often operate what Pei Chia-lan of National Taiwan University refers to as apartheid school models. In these, migrant children are taught separately from urban ones in the same school and are even kept apart from them in the playground. Okay. Political activists and thinkers across a broad array of ideologies, from libertarians to social liberals to the hard left, are intrigued or even keen. The Cato Institute, an American think tank which spends much of its time calling for a smaller state, published a sympathetic analysis of the policy in 2015. It feels that, though it might prefer a world with no government redistribution, a basic income is the simplest.
Breaking a mirror means 7 years bad luck, so does spilling salt or meeting a black cat. We've all heard such silly-sounding superstitions. Of course, why anybody would believe that stepping on a crack could break your mother's back is a mystery. But according to an article in the Royal Society journal Biological Sciences, superstitious behaviors are a natural product of evolution. Imagine an animal living in an environment where, over the course of a day, he might hear some rustling in the leaves or maybe in the grass. Now, movements in the grass could signal a predator attack, whereas the breeze in the trees is probably just the wind. Still, the animal has a choice. He can ignore all this rustling and go about his business, or he can run and hide. The most logical response would be to hide only when he hears the grass move. But what if it's hard to tell whether the noise came from the grass or the trees? Well, I could have sworn that was the trees, could be his final thought. So the animal learns to bolt at the sound of the breeze because it could foretell certain doom. That better safe than sorry attitude is essentially a superstition, one that cautious critter will likely pass on to his young. Knock on wood.
Global warming might seem like a botanical boon. After all, milder temperatures and more carbon dioxide and nitrogen should feed flora. But a 10-year study has found that any initial positive effect on plant growth from climate change may soon disappear. The report is in the journal Nature Climate Change. Researchers transplanted vegetation from 4 grassland ecosystems to lower, warmer elevations. They also modified the precipitation at the transplant sites based on altered rainfall estimates. For the first year, the plants did great, producing more biomass and churning out more oxygen for us. But their productivity went down for the rest of the decade. What happened? Warming did speed up the nitrogen cycle, which should have increased nitrogen's availability as plant fertilizer, but a lot of the nitrogen left the soil through runoff or uptake into the atmosphere. In addition, productive native plants began to lose out to species that thrive at higher temperatures but are less productive than the natives. Warmer temperatures may spur immediate growth, but in the long term, we can't expect plants to like it hot.
A person's education level is closely related to their economic background. Behind the garage is a secret storage room.
She received a scholarship from the state university.
There was little available evidence to contradict his viewpoint.
You should draw your graph on a separate page. Popular culture is now a serious subject of academic inquiry.
It's just a feeling of having tried something new and succeeded.
It's confidence, and it's an optimism that I now have.
The cotton industry purchased all its raw cotton from abroad.
The new law was harder to impose than the government thought.